All right, and we're live back in the studio here for Music Unraveled, episode 2, with Michael Booty, great friend and musical battle buddy.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, man, always a pleasure, and what an interesting topic we have. One, unfortunately, I was ignorant on until you were kind and generous enough to be persistent in turning me on to the truckers. So this is Drive-By Truckers Unraveled. And we're going to be delving into that, but you actually, between Todd Snyder Unraveled and this podcast, have gone to yet another show, the Bottle Rockets.
Correct, yes.
So,
and most Drive-By Truckers fans tend to be Bottle Rockets fans, at least the ones who know the Bottle Rockets, and a lot of them do, and vice versa. So it seems appropriate to kind of segue from them into the truckers. But yeah, it was actually the day after you and I met last time for the Todd Snyder Unraveled.
Yes.
Went and saw the Bottle Rockets in what is billed as a living room show down in Little Rock. What it ended up being was held in the basement of an old church down in downtown Little Rock.
Legit.
Yeah, total Gothic architecture. I'm not going to name the church because these living room shows are meant to
For sure.
not be pre-exposed. But it was, Gothic architecture, stone building, and the room, or the door into the room was right off of the sidewalk. And when I went in there, what I realized is not only was it the basement of a church, but it was actually the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting room.
How ironic.
Yes, and of course it was bring your own, and so I come and walking in carrying my flask of whiskey. Felt a little like, okay, this is kind of awkward, but then I noticed that the church itself, in order I would assume at least to raise funds for perhaps that program, had a keg of beer there that they were
How generous.
Serving beer for donations. So I thought, all right, so this is interesting. But it was in the Alcoholics Anonymous room, which was a trip.
Yeah. Hey, I will say this as a side note. Some of the best weddings I've ever been to were Catholic weddings.
Well, there you go. All right. So as a note, the Bottle Rockets got their start really close to the same time the Drive-By Truckers did. And now don't quote me on this, but I want to say that the Bottle Rockets, I think, started recording and traveling in earnest right around somewhere early 90s, 1993, around there. And that was about the same time that what is now known as Drive-By Truckers, Hood and Cooley, the two main guys, which we'll talk about a lot, were in a band, their original band called Adam's House Cat. So they both been road warriors, both bands, Drive-By Truckers, Bottle Rockets, have been road warriors and independent artists for 25 plus years, both of them. It was interesting. The second time I've seen the Bottle Rockets in a living room show, even though this was a church.
Was the first one in Little Rock too?
No, actually, the first time I saw them was at Sticky's in Little Rock.
Okay.
And then I've seen them in 2 living room shows since then, once in Tulsa and then this one in Little Rock.
So how often did they come through?
Well, that's the thing. I think they're going to be coming through fairly often. I talked to Brian Henneman. He's the lead singer, one of the guitarists, and the songwriter for the band. And living room shows is basically their gig now. He talked about during the show that the Bottle Rockets, like I said, they had started out early 90s, so 1993, and they had kind of gotten a couple songs on the radio, and they were being backed, by a studio. And so they were starting to kind of take off, starting to get, instead of driving around in a beat-up car, they were in a bus, and starting to really gain ground as a band. And then the internet hit. And when the internet hit, as Brian Henneman tells the story, that pretty much brought that entire scene to a screeching halt, and the buses were gone, and the what little but at least livable wage they were making as a band went away, and they had to find a different path to try to sustain themselves. So long story short, they've happened upon, and it looks like this is going to be their thing now as they travel around doing living room shows. I know they still do clubs from time to time, but he said clubs even now these days are becoming harder and harder to secure, because it's all going to, or largely going to be based on how big of a draw a given band is going to bring in. And despite the Bottle Rockets having been road warriors and making fantastic music for so long, they're still, relatively unknown band when it comes to mainstream consideration.
You mean like secure in terms of like the crowd being unruly?
No. I mean secure in terms of like how many people are going to show up and pay to buy a ticket at the door.
Well, like when we were at the, well, it might have been when we saw the Truckers. Outside of that, they were talking about when the lead singer Lucero came through, and he didn't sell. Nobody knew who he was. He didn't sell enough to be in the back room, so he played on that front stage, which I would have loved to have been there to see
too.
that.
I hate that.
But I mean, I'm sure that he was planning on it being a lot more ticket sales and a bigger show.
Well, yes, I mean, in terms of. You're talking about Mike Nichols, Lucero?
Yes.
Well, maybe. Either you take him out of the equation of the name brand, and a lot of people don't know who Mike Nichols is.
Correct. I mean, if I would know if I heard.
Yeah.
So.
But at any rate, so what Brian Henneman said is that they have gotten to the point now where they have found that the way that they're going to be able to keep doing this after 25 plus years and keep sustaining themselves and making some sort of a living is the living room circuit. And by the way, for those listeners who may not be familiar with quote unquote living room show, it's a really kind of a new breed of concert, for lack of a better word, where people in cities across the country host in their homes, or in this case was in a church, host a band to come in and play, and then they sell tickets, through various outlets. Like this one was through the Bottle Rockets publisher, ones who publish their albums. And you buy a ticket, just like you would for a concert, and then once you buy the ticket, you get the information about exactly where it's going to be. Like I knew it'd be in Little Rock, but I didn't know where in Little Rock.
Interesting. How long till they told you where it was going to be?
Once you buy the ticket, you get that right away. And then it's it's kind of a trust relationship. They say please don't share the location with anybody. I mean, this is supposed to be a very private, intimate, personal experience. Share it to other people to buy tickets. But, I mean, you're not supposed to tell people where it's going to be because we're talking about people's homes in most cases. We don't want to be just throwing that out there online. So you get that, and then it's literally, as the name implies, you go usually to someone's living room, and you're sitting there on their couch, or they have chairs bid out, or sometimes you bring a pillow and sit on the floor, and the artist is right there in the room, the band, the artist, whoever it happens to be, right there in the room and performs purely for a limited audience. Usually they're 30 to 50 people at most. I've seen them even less than that.
What did the tickets run on that?
Anywhere. I've paid anywhere from $20. I think the Bottle Rockets one was $25. Will Johnson, I saw him twice, and I think his were $20.
Nice. That's so
but
cheap.
One of the great things, that's awesome. But one of the great things is that it's like getting a personal, private performance.
That's about that Todd Snyder
artist.
show. I felt that was such an intimate show. I can only imagine what that show would have been like with the Bottle Rockets.
Yes, it was phenomenal. I mean, and it's all every living room show I've been to is great because it's just so personal. And also everybody's there. You don't generally have the chatter, the people getting drunk and making a scene or anything like that because you're in someone's home or in this case in a church, and the people who are coming there only know about it because they're on the inside. They follow these bands and they find out about it that way. So it's and then the artists are always hanging out. It's you get to talk to them and
I know
have them sign you.
So you just like I saw you have pictures with at least what did you say, Ben Henneman?
Yes. All right. So I had two good stories that I can tell about that. First one, Brian Henneman. Again, he's the lead singer.
Brian. Okay, so it's Ben Nichols, but that drives our point
Ben
home
Nichols.
that we don't recognize his
Is
name.
the director.
We just know Lucero.
When I said Mike Nichols, I thought, is that right? But that's the director.
I didn't even know his
Ben
last
Nichols.
name was Nichols.
Yeah.
So,
Ben Nichols.
anyway,
Sorry about that, Ben.
at least we're talking about you.
Please forgive me. I will make sure that I write that down. Index.
We're gonna
card.
come see you at a solo show if you play
myself.
again, definitely, and then we're gonna talk about it on the podcast.
We'll yell, "God, Mike, play!" At any rate, back to the bottle rocket.
Yeah.
Brian Henneman, which I keep saying Brian Henneman to make a distinction between Brian Henneman and Brian Wilson, by the way. He was outside before the show smoking a cigarette. And I was out on the sidewalk, and I saw him. And he was on his phone for a little while, but I waited until he got off the phone, and he was standing. So I just kind of wandered over there and started talking to him. And he was telling me that right after this particular living room show, that their next stop was New Orleans, and they were heading out from the port of New Orleans onto a rock and roll cruise ship. This is the second year that they have done this, in which they're one of the bands that plays on this rock and roll cruise. Okay. So we were talking a little bit about that, and I was saying, so what do you think of cruises? Because I've never been on one. I have a very topsy-turvy stomach, and I've always been...
I do not want to be stuck on a boat.
Exactly. I don't want to be stuck on a boat hurling the entire time, and so I've never done that and never really wanted to. But he said, the interesting thing, he said, wasn't a problem for me. I never had to take Dramamine. I had never had a problem. He said, and even after the cruise, which they were out on the water for, I think it was 4 days, something like that. Quote me on that, but it was a good while. He said, most people that come back, you step off the boat, and the world is, what they call it, sea legs, topsy-turvy.
Almost like after, I always felt that way after jumping on a trampoline when I was a kid.
Okay, you get similar experience, but like to the nth degree, right? Because it's like you're still on the ocean on flat land, and it's very disconcerting. I've even had that happen out bass fishing for a day, especially if the waters are choppy. So he told me, it didn't have any of that. He said, I stepped off that boat. He said, just as grounded as could be. Could go anywhere, take a shower, sit down, eat dinner. He never had a problem. He said, and this is the weird part. He said, and this lasted for a week. Every time I'd sit on the toilet, the world would start floating topsy-turvy on me. He said, I'd stand up from the toilet. Everything was fine. I was grounded. Sit down on a toilet. The whole world started going up and down.
I wonder why, just when he sat down.
I don't know. Well, my suggestion to him, I said, maybe it was, the close proximity to the water.
That's funny, yeah.
Which has anything to do with it, but I don't know. I just thought it was one of those absurdist stories that, I don't know why. Yeah. Neither does he, but that was his experience.
Yeah.
So that was fun, and then getting to talk to him for an extended time like that, a living room show, quote unquote, gives you that opportunity. Whereas, a lot of other shows, like with Meeting Patterson Hood or Meeting Todd Snyder, it's kind of like a chance meeting or something that you actively seek to set up. In a living room show, it's almost expected. They hang out with the crowd. I mean, that's
part of it.
Part of it, yeah. It's like a low key party, with a band that comes to play just for you.
Nice. I've never got to go to a living room show, but
we should remedy that.
Yeah, obviously.
According to Brian and I, this is their future as they move forward, continuing to make new music, continuing to perform. And I'm thinking, as I see these things pop up more and more and more, that it may be the future of underground music.
Do you know any other people out there that would be in the same sort of classification in terms of popularity, I guess would be a way to quantify it, that are also doing these living room shows?
Oh, yeah, lots of them. Will Johnson, who is originally of Centromatic, kind of a pretty strong cult following band out of Denton, Texas. The band is no longer performing as a band. However, they still do projects together, so they make it back together at some point. But I've seen Will Johnson solo twice in the living room. Got to talk to him both times. We talked about Patterson Hood. They're good friends. And as a matter of fact, they're going to be somewhere in the stages of planning a project together, musical. So I get this right, a musical take on the life of Lady Bird Johnson, is what Will Johnson told me. I don't know where in the process it is, but he said, I said, so you're telling me this will happen? He said, yes, it's going to happen. I just don't know when. He, in fact, with Marie Lepanto, Marie/Lepanto, is a Will Johnson project with an Arkansas guy who has a very strange name that I cannot remember right now off the top of my head.
Adam Fawcett?
No, it's not Adam Fawcett.
That is an interesting last name.
Yes, it's more interesting than that. It'll come to me. At any rate, they've done a collaborative project and are touring living room tour right now.
Nice.
Yeah. I've never seen Drive-By Truckers do a living room show, probably because they like to just flat out rock.
Yeah.
I would
just describe their live performance that I got to see with you, and I'll elaborate more a little later on. Is just raw.
Oh yeah, most
it was
definitely.
So raw.
Well, do you know that
in the best possible way?
Do you know that I might have told you they don't play with a set list?
That's what blew my mind,
Yeah.
man. Like, just going into a little bit of my take. Like, you inspire me as a concert goer because there was a period where I started getting a little older and I started going to a little less concerts. Then I hit about like 28 and I was like, I'm going to more concerts now. I just kind of, and I was busy in college and just didn't go as much. But when in high school and after high school, I feel like I almost got burned out. I was going to so many, if that's even a thing. But this is a different experience.
I think it's a different
musically,
reason for being there.
And having had that experience, I played in the church band growing up, and I've got across the way in the next room a full music room, Studio B, and seeing those two guys play live blew me away in their performance, because when you see like a Guns N' Roses and Axl Rose changes his shirt like 32 times, that's
very more polished and forced would be a good word too, in some ways, but more polished and more practiced. And you imagine that, I would imagine at least that show would probably be pretty similar from stage to stage to stage.
Exactly.
It's set up with certain props and certain times they're going to do this.
It's a very planned performance, which Roger Waters' show was too, but in the best possible
Most
way.
Definitely.
Definitely. I can't wait.
Yeah, and I don't mean to crap on that. I mean, it's
Likewise.
Sometimes that's what the show requires, but what the Drive-By Truckers, at the core, they're a punk band. That's at the core. I mean, one of Patterson Hood's primary primary inspirations is the Clash.
Yeah, and they did. Did they do a Clash cover?
Nope, Ramones.
Yeah.
Yeah, the KKK took my baby away.
Yes. I was looking at that set list you sent me. I thought they played way more songs.
Well, a lot of their songs, they jam during the song, so they go on for some time. But yeah, it is, and I looked at it too. It's like
I can't believe
it. As long as the list should be.
I can't believe they didn't have a set list, and I wonder if that set list was possibly devoid of some of the songs because they don't have a set list. I mean, it would just be based off the account of the people that were there that night, right?
What they do is, they've been doing this together for so long. Mike Cooley and Patterson Hood have been together since Adam's House Cat way back in 1993, 94, somewhere along those lines. And then when they started the Truckers, which actually began out of Athens, even though Mike Cooley and Patterson Hood grew up in as lifetime long friends. They grew up in the Muscle Shoals area of Alabama. But they ultimately formed the Drive-By Truckers in Athens. And they've been playing together, since 1993 or so. The band has been putting out music since 1998 when they first put out Gangsta Billy. And so they probably are connected, and we'll talk about that later, but they probably are connected in some way, almost like a lifeline between them. And so the way Patterson describes it, at least, is that they just have signals, and I've tried to catch them, like giving a signal.
One time I saw one signal.
Okay.
What did you pick up on
I
anything
haven't
at the
been
show?
able to catch a
Here's
signal.
what at the German 3, man. At one point he holds up his hand with a 3.
Was that Hood?
But it could have been he could have been making like the circle with his finger too. I believe it was Cooley.
Okay.
But I remember one of it because I was like, you blew me away when you told me I didn't use set list.
Yeah.
And then when I was seeing it live, I'm like, how they doing it? You know, where's it at?
I've tried to look for it too, and I haven't been able to catch it. But they well, first of all, they with their shows, everyone they do this. You know, they'll go back and forth. Hood will do a song. Cooley will do a song.
Even
Hood
more
do a song.
creative.
Cooley will do a song. Hood Cooley because they're they both are incredibly talented songwriters
and different in their own
very
respective rights. I appreciated both of them on different levels. You know, like I felt Cooley was. They both brought the sort of punk genre to the the Americana and the rockabilly and the country, and I mean there's just the southern rock infusion of all of these great genres. I mean that's I would give it an analogy of kind of like MMA today. It's like it's a combination of all these other great things that make that great.
And they weave it together so beautifully.
So stylistically.
I'll tell you this. I read, and I wish I could tell you the author's name and exactly where I read it, but I read an article one time in which this particular writer described the different styles of songwriting between Hood and Cooley in such a great way. I'll give him credit. I wish I could remember who it was, but he said, or he wrote, that in essence, Patterson Hood is like a prolific novelist in his songwriting. And Mike Cooley is like a modern poet in his songwriting. Yeah. And I think that is the best description that I could possibly give of what you just described, how they're different.
It's a contrast.
Different song type, song styles that blend so beautifully together. Mike has these, Cooley has these just brilliant turns of phrases. Like, for example, off of one of my favorite songs of his called "Gravity's Gone," he says, or he writes, "So I'll meet you at the bottom if there really is one. They always told me when you hit it, you'd know it. But I've been falling so long, it's like gravity's gone and I'm just floating." Wow. And it's just that creates such an image in my mind that would be so akin to a modern poet.
Do you feel like, due to your background, it's harder for you to appreciate things like that? Obviously, this being something that you do appreciate, but do you feel like you have to have? I'm the same way. Like in Todd Snyder's lyrics and the hooks that he brings are some of the things I appreciate the most. And I just got goosebumps again when you read that. But not every song I hear sometimes it's the music that gives me the goosebumps versus the turn of phrase. But I could see, given your background, how it's going to need to be some literary genius going on. And everybody that you've turned me on to, I would say, has an element of literary genius.
Well, at the core of most, not all, but most of the music that I love, and certainly at the core of the music that speaks to me most, is really insightful and strong songwriting. That's true. And yet that can come in so many different forms. It amazes me with Hood as a perfect example. It amazes me how that guy, and that's why I think prolific novelist is a good way to describe him, how he can take just everyday basic standard language of, the common man, just everyday language. No fancy words, no fancy, poetic images, just straight up conversational language, and use it to tell a story that absolutely destroys me in every way, positively and negatively. That just really emotionally hits me right here. How he does that, I don't know. I guess it's one of those things of the artist's bag of tricks, if you want to call it, or just the artistic ability to do that. But it's always listening to his songs, and maybe that's why he speaks to me so much, is because it's like listening to a song is just like listening to him tell a story. And yet the way he uses that common language to create images and well, let me just give an example to be better than explaining, I guess. The first album that I bought of the Drive-By Truckers, I mentioned last time in our last podcast, was Blessing and a Curse. And it's actually, I think, by most trucker fans I hear, is considered one of their, I don't want to say lesser albums, but one of the ones that isn't on usually in the, this is my favorite Truckers album.
How many albums, do you know how many albums they have off the top of
your
your
head?
head?
I could count them up.
13 or something.
Yeah, I could count them up here. I think I'm written down here somewhere, but a lot.
Yeah.
And they've gone through a lot of different staff changes too. But that album has a song on it called Wednesday, which is, I think, one of the most underappreciated Drive-By Truckers songs that I know of. I mean, every great now and then I'll hear somebody mention the song Wednesday. But I loved it when I first heard it. It was one of my favorite songs off the album that has so many of my favorite songs from the Truckers. And a lot of it was because of this one line right here, and it has stuck with me ever since I heard it the very first time. The story is about a guy who kind of is just one of those down on his luck, always depressed kind of persons, you know, and even when he has a love affair, it doesn't work out, and she ends up leaving him because he's just too depressing, you know. But this one line, they say every man's house should be his palace, but his castle stank of cat shit and alone.
Yeah.
That image from those, I mean, there's not a single word in there that any fourth grader would have to look up. You know what I mean? I mean, there's nothing in that is difficult to understand, and yet it creates such an expansive image in my mind. And the very first time I heard it, that's when I said, oh, this is somebody I've got to really listen to.
That is a powerful line.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it just, you take that one line, you know, his castle stank of cat shit and alone, and it tells you almost his entire life story of that particular character. You know, it's just something about his abilities. I don't know how he does it, but I admire the hell out of him for it. And by the way, Cooley as well. He's every bit as strong a songwriter. In fact, Patterson Hood would probably say he's a better songwriter than I am. But there's just something about Hood's lyrics that just cut, for me at least, right to the heart of whatever it is he is writing about. Most of his stuff is narrative. And a lot of people get confused about, or have been in the past gotten confused about his intentions with his music too, especially because of starting with Southern rock opera, which by some people was misinterpreted as a celebration of everything that the South stands for, when it really was quite the opposite of that.
That is one thing, if I can interject for a second, that I love about the Drive-By Truckers and seeing them. And I don't know, would you classify them real quick? Would you say, when we saw them, I would have classified them in their performance that night as a political band, a politically charged band. Patterson's taking a knee in some things that in some of the songs on their new album, at least. Yeah, that's going to be an image in this room. That Black Panther salute from the '68 Olympics.
And every show, I think since Ferguson or shortly thereafter, every show they play, in every place they play, they have a Black Lives Matter sign on stage with them. And someone asked him, I read somewhere along the way, some reporter asked him, at what point, or if ever, are you going to take that sign down? And he said, this is a direct quote from Patterson, he said, I'll take the sign down when it no longer needs to be said.
Yeah.
They have always been a political band. They've not always been as overtly a political band as they have become with American Band, which was their last album. That album is a pure protest album.
Yes, I would agree. And that being an album I listened to. I just listened to new stuff before we went to the show, mostly. Yeah. And then we listened to a spread of stuff on the way. But
the interesting, Mike Cooley is a man of few words. Patterson Hood has become, over the years, and most certainly with American Band, but even before then, he's become kind of the the voice of the New South, the voice of a more progressive South. You know, somebody who was born in, and who was raised in, and whose music is inspired by the South, and yet who sees and loves and celebrates everything that the South should stand for and does in certain ways, but also recognizes its dirty past as well, which is the focus of the album, The Dirty South. I mean, that's the entire focus of that album. Is, you know, he's a Southerner, and he's a proud Southerner, but he also recognizes and thinks that the South needs to atone for some of its past horrific mistakes, if you want to call them that. And I don't want to get too political with this either, by the way.
Well, yes, but and likewise, because that's just one small piece of the bigger picture that is DBT. But that, I felt like what I liked about them is that they broke the stereotype of I guess that you could just say traditional Southern band. Yep. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's being too vague or generalizing, but
that's usually the category they get kind of lumped into.
It's like, oh, you guys aren't racist? Fantastic.
Or the other way around, because when they put out American Band, now let me kind of I'm going to cover a long way around to this, and I apologize about that. But when they put out the American Band, it was an intentional political statement. It was the very first album, since Southern Rock Opera, that they didn't have Wes Freed to do the cover art. Wes Freed has been their artist, cover art, everything, you know, poster art and all that, T-shirts, everything, since almost the beginning. Certainly since Southern Rock Opera.
Did they have a difference in opinion, or
no?
Okay.
No. This was the band's decision. They had his artwork on the inside and on the back, but on the front, it is simply a black and white shot of an American flag at half mast.
Yeah, that's a powerful cover.
And so, yeah, I think that tells you right there that their intentions with this particular album were different than they've been in the past. Now, they've been a political band from the beginning, but you'd really have to listen to their songs and listen to the lyrics to really hear that. You know what I mean? Patterson Hood and Mike Cooley, they tell stories from a certain perspective, a character's perspective. And oftentimes people mistook that to mean something different. You know, like if Patterson Hood is telling a story from the perspective of a racist person in the South, he's embodying that particular character. And a lot of people mistook what his intentions were there. So with American Band came out, Cooley said, as I said, a man of few words, he said, well, we wanted to piss off the assholes. And they did. I can tell you. Being a member of the Drive-By Truckers fan group on Facebook is as much exposure as I needed. There were a lot of people who were like, I will never listen to you again. You know, I've been a fan from the beginning, and you don't speak for me, and blah, blah, blah. Which they weren't trying to speak for anybody. They were simply speaking
Neil
for
Young
themselves.
went through that. Did you not talk about that, or was that on the podcast earlier today?
Well, maybe. It's in the song. It's in a song in the Southern Rock Opera about that Neil Young and, you know, Sweet Home Alabama and, you know, all that. And he says, Hood says in that song, paraphrasing a bit, you know, I still believe a Southern man needs both of them around. Yeah, that's the duality, as he says, of the Southern thing.
Yeah.
But
I get what he's saying there. I mean, I could see where some people might misconstrue some of the message, but
I think they misconstrued the message. They misconstrued that there was a message. I think a lot of people did. They've been political from the very beginning. They've just been in their songwriting mostly. It just wasn't as overt. And to be honest with you, in my opinion, the new album, American Band, there's one song on there called "What It Means," and that was the first song that kind of the rest of the album was tailored around. Patterson Hood, in reflecting upon Ferguson, wrote this song called "What It Means," and it basically asks the question, you know, what does all this mean? And that song is most very directly. I mean, he references Ferguson. And he draws conclusions. You know, he says There's no sunlight up our asses and our heads are stuck up in it. I mean, that's kind of the conclusion he comes to, and it's very direct in your face. If
he
that
was
song,
he was in our face all night. I felt
yes,
like. in the best way.
Yes, in the best way, sure. But that song, if you remove that song from the album, I honestly don't think if they wouldn't have come out and said this is what we intend with this album, I don't think most people would have noticed.
And they played that at the show we went to, correct?
What it means?
What it means?
Yes,
Yeah.
they did.
Yeah, I want to say that Patterson did a lot of singing into the mic and not while he wasn't playing guitar on that song. That was one thing I liked about him is he was so
that song is mostly
dynamic, jumping around, and he's not like a super young guy, but he sure acted like a super young guy.
Yeah, every time I've seen him, he wears these heavy jeans and these heavy boots.
Yeah.
And he gets up there and just jumps around on stage, and he's all over the place.
He's like jumped and did a little kick at one point.
Right?
I was like, dude, that's
the guy is a force of nature. He's just energy personified.
That's why I didn't believe how old are Patterson Hood and Mike Cooley? Rough approximation.
Roughly. I know they're older than I'm in the early 50s.
Exactly.
Yeah, 50,
I was
50.
like, yeah, this guy's 40. Seeing him play, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
And I Cooley in the face looked a little older, but I saw a
with that hair covered
picture of him in that Facebook group, the Shithouse Wire, and he looked a lot younger. It was then he was going into Jason Isbell concert. I don't know if you saw that
I
picture.
did see that.
But he looked really young there.
Where somebody met him in the hallway of an Isbell concert.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
And they were like, oh, I guess they just let anybody into these shows. Oh, yeah.
Indeed.
But, I definitely, those guys had the energy that just, they're really bringing it.
They do. Well, that's what they're known for, among other things. I mean, they are in circles, in live music circles, they are known as really one of the best live rock and roll bands on the road today, and they bring it every night. And sometimes they'll put on 3+ hour shows. Like I said, they don't go by a set list, so they go.
Didn't we get a ticket because they played so long?
Yes, we did. Yeah, thanks, guys. $15 parking ticket for being like an hour over.
Yeah, I don't even.
Totally worth it.
It totally was, man. But they did. They played a long time, and I was just here is be like I would look to the left, and then because you're talking about them swapping, but it would be focus and energy here. Focus and energy there. Yeah. Oh, we're back over here, and we're back over there.
That's the shift.
That was. I've never been to a show like that.
Mm-hmm.
I've never. It's having two frontmen is unique in and of itself, but then that they came up with like a cool, unique little way to bring that to you, that is also a pattern, but then is not a pattern because there's no set list.
Well, it's a pattern based upon what moves them at the moment. They don't. I mean, according to Hood, I've read interviews. According to Hood, they don't pre-plan that. In fact, they don't practice either. I mean, I know they probably on their own, but I'm saying they don't practice as a band. When you see them on stage playing, that's the first time they've been playing together since the last time they were on stage. And they do that because
how often do they tour?
They're touring constantly for the most part. I mean, I know they take breaks and go home and get some family time, but I mean they're one of the most hardest working bands on the road. They're touring all the time.
So you would call them some hardworking Americans?
I would.
Hell yeah.
Driving down the road with some trucks.
Yeah.
At any rate, so the reason he says that they do that, the reason they don't play with the set list, and the reason that they don't practice as a band, is because they like to have that raw energy. I mean, that's the punk attitude, right? It's that we don't need to practice. We're just going to get up here and jam, and that's what they do. But they've been doing it for so long and together that you'd think that they've been practicing.
Yeah, I know. I loved the contrast of their guitar playing styles too. I felt like Cooley was more of a lead man.
Yeah, I agree.
And I liked the way his songs had more of like a Clash-esque flair to them, and more of a like little picked out lead intros. Where Patterson, one thing I noticed that was super unique, and I remarked on it throughout the show, is every time he played a solo in a song, he didn't use his pick. He used his finger. He
That's
was
right.
playing it like a bass player, but not even quite like finger picking. That's how I played solos.
I remember you
when I
mentioned
first
that.
stopped playing bass and was playing guitar. Is I sucked at a pick because I never played the bass with a pick. I was either slapping with my thumb or
Slapping the bass.
slapping the bass, mom, or plucking with my fingers, or just picking. So I thought that was unique, and I was also shocked by how much equipment and how many instruments they had.
Oh yeah, all them pretty road cases.
Wow, and Patterson's probably swapped guitars a dozen times.
Yeah, I think Patterson has. Well, of course, he has that one beat up acoustic that he, with the flowers or the insignia on it down there. It looks like flowers,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
all faded out, some sort of greenery. Anyway, that guitar, and then I think he has. I'm not a guitar expert. You would be that guy, but maybe 3 other electric guitars that he kind of rotates through. I do know, and I can't remember the song or songs, but there are a couple songs Hood plays that he uses a different tuning than your standard tuning. And so one of those guitars he has specifically for that songs that are tuned differently. And then Hood has...
That makes things easier.
Yeah, Hood has, I think it was 1, 2... I think he has generally 2. I know he has more, but I think generally 2 electrics. I see him generally use for the most part.
Yeah, he was
and
a
then
lot more stripped
down. No, 2 acoustics because he's got the one Cooley Bird acoustic, which is gorgeous. You remember that one?
Yes.
The one's got the Cooley Bird wrapping around
Yes.
the front of the guitar. Oh, so cool. Yeah.
I'm gonna see if I can't find a picture of that to edit in for people to check out.
One thing I could tell audiences who've never heard of the Truckers before. Yeah, I was mentioning the Bottle Rockets show there at the beginning, which also you should check out the Bottle Rockets. Truckers fans tend to be Bottle Rockets fans and vice versa. But the drummer, who's been with the Bottle Rockets from the very beginning, from day one, I was wearing my trucker shirt there that night, one of the trucker shirts I have, and he said, "Hey, perfect shirt for tonight because we just met David Hood last night." I can't remember where he said it was now, but the night before, wherever they were, they had just met David Hood, and David Hood is Patterson Hood's father, and he's one of the original Swampers from Muscle Shoals recording studio in Muscle Shoals, Alabama.
And they did a documentary.
Yes,
about
sir.
That, which was on Netflix. I don't think it is anymore.
Have you seen it?
I know. I
You
did
need to
get
watch
to see it. And I went to you told me the story and the connection with Patterson Hood. I think on our way back from the DBT show.
Oh, did I? Okay.
And then I was like, well, hell yeah, I'm gonna go home and watch it.
Oh,
and
yeah, definitely
I
watch
couldn't find a place to stream it.
Okay, well,
So they'll put it back on. I feel, but
it's called Muscle Shoals, and it is the story of how this music, just beautiful music, was birthed out of this really teeny tiny little nothing town in Alabama called Muscle Shoals. And the Swampers, of which David Hood, Patterson's father, was one, recorded with, an untold number. I shouldn't say untold, it's told in the movie. But they recorded with Aretha Franklin. They were the ones who did RESPECT. That was recorded with the Swampers.
Wow.
They recorded with, Otis Redding. They recorded with, Rolling Stones. Recorded with the Swampers in Muscle Shoals. They recorded with Paul Simon.
Is there some sort of funny show or story about
Yes.
About the Stones rolling up?
Well, I don't remember if it was the Stones, but I do remember a funny story with Paul Simon. He had been listening and grooving on Aretha Franklin and Otis Redding and stuff, and he called down. He saw that all these albums were coming out of Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and so he was like, "There's something magical going on down there." And he called down. This is probably mid-'70s, He called down to Muscle Shoals, and he wanted to come down, set up time to come down and record an album. And he said, "Hey, man," he said, "I'd like to get those same cool black cats that you had backing up Aretha Franklin and and Otis Redding." And I don't know if it was David or who it was that told him. Said, "Well, certainly we can work that out, although you might be a little bit surprised by the pigmentation on their skin when you get down here."
Yeah.
Because, and quite literally, watch the movie. It's amazing. It's these kids, who were kids, these little, and you look at them, they're these geeky, skinny, glasses-wearing kids that you'd expect to be doing math equations off somewhere, and yet they're making this unbelievably soulful music that all of the bands in that era were keying into and wanting to tap into, and that's the what Patterson Hood and ultimately what became Drive-By Truckers was born from.
That what a cool linkage there, and how ironic that the Bottle Rockets just. What, did he come see him at a show? Did they say where they ran into him? Or?
I didn't get the opportunity to ask him details about how exactly they happened to meet him, but I think it was at a show. I don't know if it was at a show that they were performing and David was there, or if David was performing as well. He does go around. In fact, he was here in Arkansas on a living room show, by the way, not too long ago, and it killed me that I wasn't able to make it there.
Yeah, bummer. Are there any good shows coming up besides Dr. Dog?
Oh yeah, Dr. Dog is coming up. I'm seeing the Avett Brothers next month in March.
Kane's Ballroom?
No, this is the.
Be okay.
No, I'm just trying to remember the name of the place. I can never remember the name of the place because it's an odd name, but it's down by the Bach.
Yeah, Be okay.
It's not the Bach, but it's the one right across the street from it.
Yeah. Which, what do you think about that? Do you like the Bach Center? Did you like Roger Waters there?
Oh yeah, Roger Waters was great there. I mean, I like it for the big to-do shows, the big shows with like Roger Waters, with a lot of visuals and a lot, that kind of thing. But I don't like it. I'd much rather go to a small venue. I'd much rather go to more.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you if you had a preference on, because I'm seeing you geek out on these living room shows.
I have much. My preference is most definitely to the smaller venues. That's probably largely because most of the music that I love, not that I don't love some of the bigger acts, most of the music I love is can't fill the Bach. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Jason Isbell, I think, has gotten to the point where he would be going there. And in fact, last time I saw Isbell, it was a Mother Road Festival or something. It was Isbell and Lucero and Shaky Graves.
Isbell's playing at the Jazz Festival this year. I was telling
he was just at Robinson last week.
I would, he's been on my radar everywhere. So, and you mentioned this earlier. Kind of, can you? And we talked about this, but the interconnectedness of some of the bands that we've been talking about, have seen, or going to see, or going to talk about, all of the 2017 concerts, how Panic and Todd Snyder and Hardway, how all of those cool connections, it's like periphery bands.
Yeah.
So what is so you mentioned some lineup changes. Can you kind of go overview? That's for me, I haven't been a Truckers fan for long, so I haven't followed along with any of the lineup changes. So the current lineup is all that really matters to me.
Sure,
it's the only one I'm attached to. But I know that's Jason Isbell is the connection is with Drive-By Trucker. He was in the band, right?
Yeah, and let me tell you how that happened, because it's a really cool story. First of all, Hood and Cooley have been from the beginning. They started out, like I said, in a band called Adam's House Cat. And they were one of those local bands that got a really strong local following, but it never really moved beyond that. From there, they've established a duo, just the two of them, called Virgil Kane, which I've never seen or found any tracks that are, with that name on it, but I know that they did perform along that line. And then, oddly enough, for a short time, they formed a band called Horse Pussy, which I don't know why, but it never took off.
I can't understand.
It kind of got stalled.
Too funny.
Golf clap. At any rate, after the Horse Pussy business, that's when Patterson was in Athens, and Mike Cooley was back still in Muscle Shoals area. And that's when Patterson started forming the Drive-By Truckers. And one of the reasons, as he tells it, that he formed the Drive-By Truckers is because he was really wanting to lure Mike Cooley back in to playing with him, and on a legitimate basis. And that's what happened. In 1998, they put out Gangsta Billy, which has some of my favorite songs on the Living Bubba, which I want to talk about. Panties in Your Purse, which is a great Cooley staple, 18 Wheels of Love, in which Patterson kind of tells the story of his mom running off with a trucker, which is a great live song because it's, everybody knows the words and everybody sings along. Steve McQueen.
I was about to ask if that was on that album.
The coolest goddamn motherfucker on the silver screen.
Did you yell that out at the show? When
I yelled out Steve McQueen. If you remember, I yelled out Steve McQueen, just hoping that maybe they would think to get it in there somewhere. And Mike Cooley said, it's a Patterson Hood song, but it was Cooley's turn at that particular time when I yelled it out, which was kind of dumb of me. But I yelled it out, and Mike Cooley goes, "Yeah, I get that all the time." At any rate, so that was "Oh Buttholeville," which is a great song too. Then they followed that up with "Pizza Deliverance," which has a great song on it, several great songs, but it has a great song on it called "Too Much Sex, Too Little Jesus," which, if we have time, I'll tell a story about that one as well. In 2001 is when they put out Southern Rock Opera, and at that point, that's when the current drummer, Brad Morgan, joined the band. He's been with them since then. So Hood, Cooley, and Morgan established there in
Southern Rock Opera?
Yeah, Southern Rock Opera in 2001. And then the next album was Decoration Day, and that's where Isbell joined the band. And what happened was, between Southern Rock Opera and Decoration Day, John Neff, who was also one of the kind of original guys from the early on, ended up leaving the band. And I don't know, to be honest with you, the story around exactly why that happened. But so the band had been kind of built on three guitarists, like you said, two leads, and then they had another guitarist. Jay Gonzalez is in there now as that third guitarist. And they were playing a small show. They hadn't really built up a huge audience yet, although Southern Rock Opera had kind of established them as significant underground type of band to watch. And Jason Isbell just happened to be in the audience. And they had met him previously, and he had played with them and told them how much he liked them. Not played with them on stage or anything, but I mean just jamming in the living room somewhere. And so Patterson knew that he knew their songs, and he knew that he was a fan, and he knew that he was lacking a third guitarist, and on stage they were kind of on the spot going to have to try to figure out how to handle that. And so he said, "Hey, Jason, man, you know our songs. Why don't you come on up here and join us?" And so he was like, "Yeah, sure." So he just on the spot got up there on the stage and joined him in that song. And Patterson tells it, it was just like, it just meshed. It just, everything that night came together. And for more or less, Jason was a drive-by trucker from that point forward. He was with the band for 3 albums over 3 years: Decoration Day, The Dirty South, and A Blessing and a Curse.
You said The Dirty South is that one that kind of got misinterpreted?
Well, I think some people misinterpret a lot of their stuff.
They probably, the classic judge a book by its cover, because when you hear Dirty South, you're like, well,
Yeah.
I think this that
and Southern Rock Opera too, because they established themselves there as the voice of the South. I mean, they made it. They took a real risk, as Hood admits. Think about this: they're an unknown band. Their first real studio album is a rock opera about the South. That's destined to fail, right? I mean, that's just that's a pretentious and a little self-righteous and a little weird, quite frankly. Your first album is gonna be a rock opera about the South. Don't know if we can sell that.
Not a wide audience there.
Yeah, exactly. And yet it made a huge splash. Well, on that level at least. I mean, yeah, statistically speaking.
Yeah.
At any rate,
have you seen Jason Isbell?
Yes. Yeah. Not with the Truckers, unfortunately.
Solo,
no, I didn't discover them, quote unquote, discover them until after Isbell's era with the band. But I have seen him live 2 or 3 times.
What year did he leave?
He left in 2006. Well, his last album was A Blessing and a Curse, and that was out in 2006. And that's when, and they left on good terms, but difficult terms. Isbell was kind of got hooked up with Shauna Tucker, who was the bassist during that time with the Truckers, and it got really ugly.
So that caused the lineup change in two different ways. Then.
Yeah, it got really ugly, and then Isbell got the classic rock and roll story, right? He got heavy into drugs and alcohol and out of control, and got to the point where he was interfering with the band's work, and Hood and Cooley had to tell him, look, man, we just can't do this with you anymore. And it was tense that time. They've since Isbell has since turned his life around, largely because of his beautiful wife and very talented wife, Amanda Shires, who told him, before they got married, told him, I'm not doing this with you. And I'm paraphrasing, obviously, I wasn't there. But I'm not, I love you, and I think we could have a future together, but this isn't our future, and it's not my future, and it's either me or it's that scene. And Isbell did some major soul searching and decided that love was more important.
Well, I've been
drugs.
seeing his name everywhere. I see he's playing at the Jazz Fest, but he was popping up in my feed. I'm sure all of my devices have been listening to us talk about related artists, and then they put it on Facebook or something for me to see.
Yeah. He's with especially with Southeastern, which was his real breakthrough album, I'd say, to gain him a wider audience.
Is he in another band besides the 400 Unit? Does he have something else going on?
No, he does put out some albums solo.
Interesting.
And I'm not really sure. I don't know how that works. What do I do? What do I just put my name on? What do I put on his and the 400 Unit? But as far as I'm concerned, it's Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit. I mean, Jason Isbell is the songwriter, obviously, and he's the front man. But the 400 Unit have been with him since he started. Since he split with the Truckers, and started doing his own thing. Yeah. And Amanda Shires, his wife, tours with him when she's not on her own tours, and works with him.
That's cool.
And it's really cool. He's also joined her on stage, and when he joins her on stage in her show, she introduces him as Mr. Amanda Shires.
That's too funny.
They're an interesting couple.
You ever listened to the Tedeschi Trucks Band?
Oh yeah, I went and saw them actually.
That's another kind of Panic interwoven band. They played a lot with Panic. About Jimmy's played with them. John Bell recently hopped on stage, Panic's frontman, at a show with them. But they have kind of that dynamic because Susan Tedeschi had her own band first, and Derek
As
Trucks,
did Trucks.
obviously, yeah. So then the Tedeschi Trucks Band, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I knew the Derek Trucks band before he and Susan Tedeschi got married and joined forces. But they are a force to be reckoned with together, no doubt about it. Two of the best slide guitarists, if not the best slide
Derek Trucks is a
guitarists
prodigy.
playing today.
Yeah, Derek Trucks is a total prodigy. There's a video I watch all the time on YouTube of Derek Trucks playing a song called Surprise Valley with Widespread Panic, and him and Jimmy are just going back and forth. And, John Bell plays slide guitar, but not anywhere on the level of these people we're talking about. You'll check this out since you've been playing guitar for some time now, there's a video of Jimmy Herring talking about slide techniques, and he's talking about people like Derek, but there's these Jimmy Herring, I don't know if he's trying to do lessons or what, and they're great sources, but they are super over the top and like
we've watched one of those.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's like, well, you just kind of. I'm like, oh, you just dibba-dibba-doo, do you?
And like when he's breaking down the theory, and he's like, then I found this chord, which is an A sharp minor 17, suspended to
over the square root of 4.
Yeah, and I mean it's like calculus. It's like, well, which of my variables are X or Y? But he has one where he goes into slide techniques, and he's like, my friend Derek, he does stuff like, and we should have when we do the 2017 concert
which
review,
we'll get to eventually.
We're pumping it here on the podcast right now. But it's Jimmy Herring and the Invisible Whip.
Most definitely. And another one we need to go see, and I've seen him several times, but you need to see him. because he's another of those guitarists, mentioning slide guitarists, that I would put in that group, and that's Luther Dickinson,
Never
the
heard
North
of him.
Mississippi All Stars.
I've heard of the North Mississippi All Stars.
Yeah, that's his band. He and his brother Scott, their band, I should say. But I mean, he's the guy up front with the guitar. I mean, he's just one of those guys whose fingers look like they're about 10 feet long, and he's all over that neck at all times. He's phenomenal. He played with the Black Crowes for a good while as one of the lead guitarists there as well.
Nice.
Back to, though, if you don't mind, back to the lineup you asked me about. As after Isbell left, shortly after that, then Shauna Tucker kind of went and did her own thing. She's got her own band now. So now what we've got is Hood and Cooley and Brad Morgan. They've been together since the very beginning. Jay Gonzalez joined in 2008.
And that's their piano, all sorts of
He's a Swiss Army knife of a musician kind of guy. He is just uber talented. I kind of have a man crush on him.
He was super talented. I was into his presence.
He's created his own instruments. I mean, he's just one of that kind of guy who creates his own instruments because he can't get the sound that he wants off the instruments that are actually already created. He's one of those kind of guys. He's just, he kind of fades into the background a little bit there. But if you could tear your eyes away from Hood and Cooley for a moment and watch him, he is just mind-bogglingly good, and
he did have some great overlay. It's interesting to see that dynamic of three guitar players, because I've seen some bands that have three guitar players and it's just over the top, because the two of the guitar players aren't both frontmen who are, and I will say this: I am more of a rhythm guitar player, and I study lead, but I've never really got into theory like I would need to, or I've just never really gone down that rabbit hole. I'm more of a rhythm guy. I like finger picking. I like strumming.
Yeah.
And
I'm more of a can't play worth a crap guy. But I'm trying still.
Hey, man, that's all.
Little by little.
Do you have time each day where you write?
Well, hold on. Before you go there, I cannot go away without mentioning Matt Patton, because if I leave out one member of the band, I've done the band the band a disservice.
Is he the new bassist?
New. He's been with them since 2012.
Okay.
But he played with them. He's been with them officially since 2012. He played with them on stage many times before then. He became an official member in 2012. He also has another band called the Dexatines, which is a real kind of, I don't know, it's so hard to classify some of these bands, but I mean, I would put them more in the punk rock type category, but also very politically driven and kind of ideologically motivated in their songwriting. They're a lot of fun too, and I saw them at Whitewater Tavern. I don't remember last year, the year before. I can't really remember. Ended up going by myself, one of those solo shows that I had to fly solo, and walked in the door, and there's a whole band. That's what I love about these small places. Ended up hanging out with the entire band all night, partying with them all night long, enjoying their show. This was a unique experience. But I met Matt Patton there, and he's one of these guys that just looks like to me that he is like pinching himself every minute of every day, at least when he's up there on that stage, because 99% of the time when he's up there playing, man, he's got a smile plastered. Did you notice that?
Yeah,
I did. Smile plastered across his face from start to finish. He looks like he's just up there playing, going, "I cannot believe."
I felt that way.
So there you go. That's the full band as it stands now. And Hood and Cooley have both said that they think that in terms of all told together, this is their tightest crew.
Yeah, I was, like I said, the current lineup is the only one I've ever known.
Yeah.
When did you start listening to the Truckers?
Good question. I want to say, and this is a bit of a guesstimation, but I had known about the Truckers, much like with Todd Snyder. I'd known about the Truckers for a couple years before I finally started looking into their music. I had heard their name. I had heard, of their reputation as really high-class musicians. And for some reason, it took me a couple years to finally get into them. And when I bought A Blessing and a Curse on CD, which I've since remedied and bought vinyl, but when I first bought that, because it simply was the cheapest one I could find, And the second that I started listening to it, as we've talked about with other bands, it was like, why in the hell did I wait so long to get into this band? But I would say it was around probably 2011-ish, somewhere around there. Because the first time I saw them live was at Riverfest in 2013, and that was after I had kind of become a big fan already. Not kind of. I was a fanboy by then.
Nice.
But you know, I had what I always like to do with new bands, or bands new to me, I should say, is look at what they're doing now. You know, look at what are they creating now, and do I like it, and does it speak to me? And if it does, then I'll start going backwards and combing through their back catalog. And that's the same thing I did. Well, it's actually not the exact same thing I do with the Truckers, but I mean, once I listened to that album because it was cheapest, then I went and bought their most recent and started getting everything else that I could. First time I saw them was at Riverfest in 2013, and then I saw them at George's a year later, and then I saw them at the Rev Room a year later. I saw Patterson Hood perform solo in 2015 at South on Main, and then that's where I got to meet him, which I'll talk about in a second. And then I also saw him solo the very next night as part of, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but the Comparis Distinguished Lecture Series at the Clinton Presidential Library in Little Rock. They had him in there as a significant voice of Southern culture, and they did interviews, and then between questions he'd play songs as well. So that was a unique experience. And then the last time was when you and I went last year in September. Was the last time I saw them. Not the last time I will.
Many thanks.
And not the next time I'm sure that we will.
Yeah, it was such an amazing night, man. I was blown away. I was sitting there just jaw dropped because it's like I felt the same way when I saw Panic. I was not really into their music. I saw them live for the first time, and that was like really my first. I'd only ever listened to maybe 3 songs. So it was like a heavy dosage. And you know how much better live performances tend to be than studio albums.
Oh, most definitely. Although I will say, too, that live performances, for most people at least, and for most bands, tend to be better if you're familiar with the music, too. That may not be so much true for a jam band, or it may be as much true for a jam band. But I think it's true for bands in general. If you know the music going into it, you probably get more out of the live performance.
Yeah,
I do at least. That may not be true for everybody.
I think, yeah, I could see that. I just both in these instances and Todd Snyder, I just got mind blown.
Yeah,
it was just like mind ninja'd. I was not expecting that. It was like, because Panic's an incredible band. Todd Snyder, and
you think of one guy getting up in there with his acoustic guitar, and this is
one of the best concerts I've ever been to.
I know, right?
I mean, no, and the same thing for the Truckers show. It's like, and it's not like I was skeptical going in, but it's just kind of like, I mean,
you go in not sure.
It wasn't, and why I was so willing to go to Todd Snyder, and just was just kind of like, oh yeah, I really want to make this happen. So can I, and I was able to make it happen. I didn't have anything else going on, but I was almost not say reluctant to go to the Truckers, but it's like I never really got into them, but I just kind of took your word for it and went with it, and I had a blast, man. It was an awesome experience, and that's why I do these things. It's because of the experience. It's a fun experience.
You mentioned earlier, and we'll swing back around to that again about how going to concerts when you were young, and then you kind of got out of it, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. In like my earlier 20s, like I did, and then I took there's probably 3 or 4 years, and then Cora and I started ramping it back up.
See, that's kind of similar to me. I mean, when I was young, when I was a teenager, my friends and I went to concerts. I saw Floyd twice. I saw,
really?
The Who. I saw.
What year did you see Floyd?
Oh, I'd have to go back in my memory banks, but it was back in Florida, though.
Nice.
Back when I was a teenager.
Super jelly.
I've seen Steve Miller. I've seen Allman Brothers a couple times. Leonard Skinner 3 times. I used to go to shows like that all the time. I mean, whenever we possibly could. Aerosmith. But somewhere between teenager and having to do all the adulting stuff, I kind of lost track of that. I kind of lost track of what was going on in the music scene. Fell out of going to live shows, fell out of really listening to music at all. I mean, I just kind of fell out of it. And then, of course, fell then into that basic idea that most people have is that, they don't make good music anymore, right? And it was actually when I discovered what I call this underground music scene is when I got back into it again. And to me, especially because of the intimacy of, or the general, the basic intimacy of the kinds of shows that you get in the underground music, it just lit a fire beneath me. And for me, going to a show like that trucker show that you and I went to, especially when we're on the rail like that, it's forces my mind to stop and be in the moment and not in tomorrow and what I have to worry about, not in yesterday, but in the now, right now, because it's that energy coming off those players and just that washing over me just makes me feel it, and I guess that puts me in the moment. And it's one of those, I think, I'm overstating this, but it's true for me at least to some degree. It's one of the relatively rare experiences in a lifetime in which you're tapping into something very real. And that's why I like this kind of music. It's not prepackaged. It's not polished. It's not, taken over by a studio and adding all the little elements that are going to appeal to a wide audience. It's the music that these guys and girls, many female artists out there doing their thing as well. It's the music that they're making not because it's making them a living, although they're trying to get that, but they're making it because they don't have a choice. It's got to come out. You know what I mean? They have to do this. Otherwise, they wouldn't. I've heard so many artists say stuff like that. Some of these musicians, I do this not because it pays a lot of money, because trust me, it doesn't. It's not a glamorous lifestyle. They do it because they have to. And so when I'm there on the front of the stage, or I'm there on the rail, if I can get there, and I get there most times, it's tapping in, leaving the facade and the bullshit of the world and everything that goes along with it behind for 2 to 3 hours, and tapping in to something real and something shared. You know what I mean?
Well,
it just feeds me. I need it.
The comparison you kind of gave, some of the bands you mentioned that you maybe saw when you were younger, like when good music was on the radio, I guess you could say that. I mean, some of the acts that you mentioned are well known and icons in their own right, and probably appreciated in their own time, and still.
Definitely.
But,
like Jackson Browne, he's a good example. I saw him not too long ago at the AMP, and he's somebody who came up in, commercial radio era, right? Before it came overly commercialized, before it came to the point where you're only getting a song on radio if you have enough money to pay for it, right? Before it got to that point. He's in my mind, one of our best songwriters ever, still to this day.
And still.
Jackson Browne.
Yeah, you mentioned this on the Todd Snyder podcast. It's like all of these bands that we've mentioned, an exception to maybe, but again, I still don't meet anyone that knows who Widespread Panic is, as we both mentioned. But it's not that these bands are underground. It's not that they're like you mentioned, it's not like they're playing shows for gas money, so to speak. That's how they're, yeah. But let's say the Truckers, Todd Snyder, Jason Isbell, Widespread Panic, they're probably all making a living.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, now.
And granted, it's such a hard road to make it. The guy I had on the podcast this morning, Josh Wilson, I feel like he could, and I kind of harped on him earlier in the podcast about how much of a renaissance man he was, because in my mind, he could have done anything with music.
Yeah.
He's so multi-talented that it always blew me away watching him work, performer.
Think about it this way. most of the band, even Drive-By Truckers, Isbell is probably best of the Drive-By Truckers at this point, not in terms of artistic output, but in terms of, the types of stadiums he can fill, or the types of venues he can fill. He's tapped into something that has brought him to the next level, right? Him and his band. And so have the Truckers, and so has Todd Snyder and Hard Work Americans and Widespread Panic. They've tapped into, something that allows them to travel in a bit more comfort, that allows them to, have a little bit easier living, be able to take some time off, but even so, I mean, look at them. They have to tour. They have to. It used to be they'd sell albums, and then the tour was meant to promote the album. These days, the album is really, kind of fodder for the tour, in essence. I mean, it's the live music. I think even in most cases, even with say the Truckers, that they're still making most of their income off getting out there on the road.
Yeah, and it seems like that's what they want to do.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah,
I'm sure it turns into a little bit of a grind.
I imagine. I mean, I know that I'm sure there are times it's got to be hard being away from your family for that long, and and hard even when you're on the road to keep up with them. When you're up and working, they're asleep. I imagine it's a real disconnect, I would think. And it's got to be pretty tough, and especially if you're piling all your stuff into a van carrying a trailer, which a lot of these bands, including the Truckers, I mean, that's what they do. They drive their own van. They don't have a big old bus. They're all piled into a little minivan type thing when carrying their equipment in a trailer, going from place to place, making enough to keep them rolling. Brian Henneman even said during that show, he gave the advice, as I would pass along because I think it's good advice, that if you go see the show, support the art, support the artists. These people are out there trying to create and trying to make something real. And they oftentimes have the experience where, fans will come up to them and want to buy them a round of drinks, And he says, and that's great. That's great. I mean, I don't mean to say that's not great. He said, but the thing is, understand, most, not all, but most of these places we go play, drinks for the band are kind of part of the thing. He says, so what you're really doing is you're buying drinks for a band that already has all the drinks they need as part of their show pay, right? So he said, if you really want to honor the band, you really want to show appreciation, buy a T-shirt, buy a CD, buy their music, buy it.
For real.
I mean, he said that's what'll help a band to really keep going and make some sort of a living out of this. And I don't think about that. This is a band that's been going for over 25 years that are still having to put that message out. That's what I'm going to say. Underground music. It's the music that, as I find that is not known by the general person on the street. That's not played on the general radio station.
Yeah.
So can I talk about three great Alabama icons?
Lay it on me, man.
Have you listened to Southern Rock Opera? The album.
In passing.
Okay.
I couldn't tell you any tracks off of it off the top of my head.
It is as it is.
Is that a double? It is a double disc.
It is a double set, double disc set, double album set. That is. Well, I think I mentioned it earlier. It is a rock opera about the South, the modern South, and it takes kind of as its conceit, as its central story. It uses the Leonard Skinner story and mythology as kind of the central concept of the opera itself. And so there's a band, right, that is at the center of the story, and that band gets on an airplane and there's a plane crash. The Leonard Skinner story. Okay,
right,
so it weaves in kind of that story as well as weaving in the mythology of Leonard Skinner and how they became really a big band almost immediately, right? I mean, they weren't performing for maybe a handful of years, and yet here we are in this day
straight
and
out
age.
of high school for the most part,
right? And here we are in this day and age, still pointing to them as one of the best rock and roll bands. And they, anytime you say Southern rock, everybody's going to say, "Oh, Leonard Skinner," right? And yet they were really active for a short period of time. At any rate, in the middle of all that, also is this kind of assessment of or analysis of this, what Patterson Hood calls the duality of the Southern thing, about how the South is more than one thing. I mean, if people look at the South and Southerners, they kind of have this image in their mind, and that is part of what the South is, but there's a whole other part that a lot of people don't know unless they are Southerners, right? And so that's kind of what the album focuses on. And there's this one of those works. It's a kind of a spoken word song called "The Three Great Alabama Icons" that Patterson Hood wrote, and he wrote it specifically to bridge two songs, to both to show the relevance of the song from one to the next, but also to show how they all relate to the overwhelming themes of the album itself. The first one is Southern Rock. I'm sorry. First one is the Southern Thing. Okay, and then he had the Southern Thing, and then he had the song called Wallace. And the Southern Thing is kind of about what the South is all about, and then it leads into George Wallace, which it's the story of George Wallace going to hell and meeting the devil. And how
I'm going to be talking about him on my history podcast.
Okay, we got to listen to this song.
Yeah.
How the devil is kind of, as the story progresses, is like all excited because George Wallace is coming. This guy's great, man. I've heard so much about him, And so he gets all prepared, and for George Wallace to show up. So it's kind of the two songs he was trying to bridge, and he was having a hard time figuring out how to bring them together. And it's ultimately this spoken word song he wrote called "The Three Great Alabama Icons" that brought those two songs together. Now, he performed this at the Presidential Clinton Library, and it was the first time he had actually performed it live in several years. And he did it at the behest of, or at the request of, the guy who was interviewing him. When I first heard it, I loved it just because of the way his voice tells the story. And so one time at college, at my college, I teach at college, they were doing a student event thing, and they were having these monthly poetry reading contests. And since they knew that I taught creative writing and taught poetry and dabbled some in poetry, they asked if I would come and, be one of their readers. And the thing is, I don't really write poetry. I've written one good poem in my life. I got it published. It's the only one I've ever gotten published. And then maybe two other decent ones that I would share only with people who, I trusted wouldn't, throw up on it. And I'm not a poet, let's put it that way. And so what I did instead is I took Patterson Hood's Three Great Alabama Icons, and I read it as a poem in that poetry reading.
Interesting.
So would you like to hear it?
Yeah.
Do we have time?
For sure. Yeah,
right.
For sure. We got plenty of time. I was actually just looking to see how many views we had on the Todd Snyder podcast.
Okay.
Because we got a few shares. It's only been up for a few hours, but
Sweet.
Yeah, people have been commenting on it.
So this is where he talks about kind of the duality of the Southern thing, okay? And it sets up this idea of George Wallace going to hell. I'll do the best I can. I'll try to do Patterson Hood for out here, but I grew up in North Alabama back in the 1970s when dinosaurs still roamed the earth. I'm speaking, of course, of the three great Alabama icons, George Wallace, Bear Bryant, and Ronnie Van Zant. Now, Ronnie Van Zant wasn't from Alabama. He was from Florida. He was a huge Neil Young fan, but in the tradition of Merle Haggard, riding Okie from Muskogee to tell his dad's point of view on the hippies in Vietnam, Ronnie felt that the other side of the story should be told. Neil Young always claimed that Sweet Home Alabama was one of his favorite songs, and legend has it that he was an honorary pallbearer at Ronnie's funeral. Such is the duality of the Southern thing. And Bear Bryant wore a cool-looking red checkered hat and won football games, and there's few things more loved in Alabama than football and the men who know how to win at it. So when the Bear would come to town, there would be a parade. Me, I was one of them pussy boys because I hated football, so I got a guitar. But a guitar was a poor substitute for a football with the girls in my high school. So my band hit the road, and we didn't play no Skinnerd neither. I came of age, rebelling against the music in my high school parking lot. It wasn't until years later, after leaving the South for a while, that I came to appreciate and understand the whole Skinnerd thing and its misunderstood glory. I left the South and learned how different people's perceptions of the Southern thing was from what I had seen in my life, which leads us to George Wallace. Now, Wallace was, for all practical purposes, the governor of Alabama from 1962 until 1986. Once, when a law prevented him from succeeding himself, he ran his wife, Lurleen, in his place, and she won by a landslide. He's most famous as the belligerent racist voice of the segregationist South, standing in the doorways of schools and waging a war against the federal government that he decried as hypocritical. Now, Wallace started out as a lawyer and a judge with a very progressive and humanitarian track record for a man of his time, but he lost his first bid for governor in 1958 by hedging on the race issue against a man who spoke out against integration. Wallace ran again in 1962 as a staunch segregationist and won big, and for the next decade he spoke out loudly. He accused Kennedy and King of being communists, and he was constantly on the national news representing the good people of Alabama. And you know, race was only an issue on TV in the house that I grew up in. Wallace was viewed as a man from another time and place, but when I first ventured out of the South, I was shocked at how strongly Wallace was associated with Alabama and its people. Racism is a worldwide problem, and it's been like that since the beginning of recorded history. And it ain't just white and black, but thanks to George Wallace, it's always a little more convenient to play it with a Southern accent. Bands like Lynyrd Skynyrd attempted to show another side of the South, one that certainly exists but few saw beyond the rebel flag, and this applies not only to their critics and detractors, but also their fans and followers. So for a while, when Neil Young would come to town, he'd get death threats down in Alabama. Ironically, in 1971, after a particularly racially charged campaign, Wallace began backpedaling, and he opened up Alabama politics to minorities at a rate faster than most northern states or the federal government. Wallace spent the rest of his life trying to explain away his racist past, and in 1982, he won his last term in office with over 90% of the black vote. Such is the duality of the Southern thing. And George Wallace died back in 98, and he's in hell now, not because he's a racist. His track record as a judge and his late life quest for redemption make a good argument for his being, at worst, no worse than most white men of his generation, North or South. Because of his blind ambition and his hunger for votes, he turned a blind eye to the suffering of black America, and he became a pawn in the fight against civil rights cause. Fortunately for him, the devil is also a Southerner. Well, all props go to Hood.
Wow, that's powerful. Did he play that at the show?
Yeah, he played that. Well, not at our show.
Yeah,
he played that though at the
solo performance.
Well, yeah, at the solo performance at Clinton Presidential Library. By special request. He had to have notes up there, kind of like I was reading it, because it had been so long since he had played it.
Did you get you got some lyrics to like a new song from the Trucker show?
Perilous Night. That's correct. Yeah. Yes. Cool. Which they have since put out as a single.
Was it out when we saw him?
Yeah. No, it's a song he had just written.
Yeah, and he'd like.
That's why there were the lyrics there. Yeah. And interestingly enough, they had something taped to the speaker, and that's what I tore off right just because I knew they were going to throw it away. I'm like, I'm not.
I'll take that. Thank you.
And so I brought it back, and I was like, what is this? It was just kind of like some disconnected, what looked like stanzas, but there didn't seem to be any logic to them. Come to find out, what I pulled off was one of 3 different pages of the entire song of Perilous Night, and through working with other people that did similar things that I did, somebody else pulled off the second page at some other show, and somebody else put off the third page at some other show, and we online and Facebook somehow came together, like put it all together, and we had the full song.
Wow.
So that was Perilous Night. That should be, it's out on a single now. It should be coming out on their next album, I would imagine. But it's a song about the where was the rally? Where was the rally to try to the statue?
Charlotte.
Charlotte.
Yes.
I want to say Charlottesville, and I knew that wasn't right. Charlotte. So it's a song all about that night, perilous night.
Yeah. That was just such an amazing show. I remember when they played that. So,
what else you got, Brian?
Where does that leave us? We have really delved in, man. I kind of shared my personal experience as a noob, someone new to the fanboy club of the truckers. But man, we hit on a lot of high points. You got anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
Well, the only thing I guess I would add is that if anyone's interested, as we plugged on the last one as well, check out my YouTube channel. Every time I go to shows like this, unless the artist or the venue or both expressly say, please do not take a video, I always try to take a couple, maybe 3 full song videos and upload those just as a memento for me, but also as a document. I like to document it. I will say, too, for those of you out here that do go to concerts, I am very familiar and very conscious of the holding the phones up. I don't use my phone for video. I use a small little point and shoot, which I hold like right in front of my face in order to try to...
Great quality.
Well, yeah, but the biggest thing is I don't like to be obtrusive. And I understand that this is a big thing now because everybody holds their doggone phones up, and then you're trying to watch a show through everybody else's phones. And so what I do instead is I have a little point and shoot, and I hold it down near my face, and so I can kind of inch back and see that I'm in frame, but I otherwise keep it from the view of anybody behind me.
Yeah, I barely noticed that you were recording.
I try to keep it as unobtrusive as I possibly can, but I do. I take couple 3 full song shows. I just basically decide at any given moment, whatever song is coming up next, I'm recording that song. That's usually the way I do it. And whatever song it happens to be, that's what I get. So if you're interested, check out my YouTube channel. It's Michael Boothilier, which is how you. It's not my real name is Michael Booty, but my YouTube channel is Boothilier, and I'll spell that Michael first of all, Michael, and then Boothilier, Boothillier. Phonetically, it's Boothilier.
Nice.
And you can link me too off that, I'm sure.
I'll definitely. I'm gonna throw a URL up in the description. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thanks for having me, bud.
Yeah, looking forward to having you back and having. I feel like you're almost like when we have a boxing coach come in. That's all they've ever done. They're a specialist. You're kind of like the musical specialist. Of
the big thing is I'm a music lover of real music. People ask me what kind of music I like, and I say good music. Because I cross genres. I'm all over the place at all times. But I like good music. I like real music. I like music that has something to say. Which is why I suppose good songwriting is so often at the core of that.
Yeah.
So I love sharing that. You know what I mean? I don't consider myself an expert really in it. I guess I have some expertise just because I follow this stuff. But I mean, more than anything else, most people don't care. Most people don't know the bands I'm talking about, nor do they really care to hear me talk about them. So they have the opportunity to come in here and just chat with a good buddy like you about something that I love and that you're also passionate about is great.
I like narrowing in on the audience too. So because I mean, when I feel like that Todd Snyder, Drive By Truckers, Panic, they all have these such unique communities.
Yes. Well, Drive By Truckers is a perfect example because when I go to a trucker show, it's like a family reunion. I see
you saw a ton of people at both. I noticed that.
We're all getting together and hugging and catching up. I mean, it really is. It's like kind of a reunion every time. Not only with the band, but with the people that I have, that come to the same venues. Yeah, you actually get to say, wait, so there is other people like me out there. There are the people out there that know this stuff and love it as much as I do. So it's a unique experience for sure. And we do need to talk. You mentioned earlier about upcoming shows, which we'll have to talk about. Dr. Dog is coming up. That Lucero Family Picnic in Memphis, which is only 3 hours.
I saw
Lucero, Deer Tick, Turnpike Troubadours, John Moreland, and a couple more. Those are the big names. Deer Tick, I want to see again bad. So we'll have to talk about that one too. But at any rate, even if when I'm not going, I'll probably swing down there as a solo if I have to.
Looks like we got another episode coming up.
There you go.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. I look forward to having you back,
and
look forward to hitting a show with you soon. And just to plug a future spot we'll be doing, we're going to get Colby, a.k.a. my friend Bill,
Good
on
guy.
the podcast. We're going to do...
He's another one passionate about music, too.
Man, the first time you two guys got together, and I was attempting to string your guitar and also participate in the conversation and also listen to the conversation. It was funny, but because it was just like, hey, it was like almost feeling out process. Have you heard of this band? Yeah, I love that band. Well, have you heard of that band? I love that band. It was like, and then like after like 2 bands each, you're like, all right, bro, like we're here.
Yeah, we're on the same page. We're on
So,
the same wavelength.
but yeah, I look forward to getting both you guys in the same room and being on the podcast. And I remember because I've been wanting to start a podcast for a long time, and I remember thinking about that. I'm like, why aren't we recording this?
Yeah, well, I remember a couple times hanging out. This is after you talked about doing it and maybe gotten to the point where you were actually thinking about how you were going to do it. But every time we'd start talking, you'd be like speaking to the microphone.
Yeah,
we need to just start recording this.
It became more and more reality, and it was just a thought there for a while, and then now it's this. So and it just is going to keep expanding like most of the things I do. So
I'll come back anytime. I'm always ready to talk music.
All right, bro. Well, let's snap a picture for
posterity's
promotional
sake.
purposes.
That's
yeah.
cool.
All right, man. We're signing off. We'll see you guys next time.
Take care, people. Thank you for listening.